The night was heavy and cold, the stars hidden behind thick gray clouds, and the wind whispered like a warning through the narrow paths of the alien village. Most families were asleep, their homes silent, their fires low. But in one dark corner of the settlement, something cruel was happening. Something no one dared to see. The little alien girl was no older than 10 cycles. Her skin pale with a faint glow that made her different from the others. Her large silver eyes were filled with tears, and her small hands trembled as her stepmother pushed her down into the dirt. The woman's face was twisted with anger. Her voice sharp as a blade, she shouted that the child was a burden, that no one would miss her. And with heartless strength, she began to cover the girl with heavy soil. Pressing it down as if to erase her existence, the child's tiny chest heaved, her voice weak and broken as she tried to cry out. Every sound was muffled by the growing weight above her. She begged for mercy, but the stepmother's ears were deaf to her suffering. The woman only laughed under her breath, her hands moving faster, piling more dirt, hiding the girl's body until only a faint shimmer of her hair was left. No one in the village came. No one looked. People knew the stepmother's cruelty, but they feared her wrath. So they turned their faces away, closing their doors and their hearts. And the little alien girl was left alone, sinking deeper under the cold earth. Her voice almost gone yet, even buried, she did not give up. Her lips moved, her throat burned, and from under the dirt came a sound so faint it could barely be called a cry. It was not loud, it was not clear, but it carried something powerful. It carried the desperate will to live far from the homes at the edge of the village. A human traveler was walking, his boots dusty, his shoulders heavy with a worn bag. He had come to trade a few supplies before moving on to another town. He was tired, his mind drifting, when suddenly he froze, his ears catching something unusual, a faint sound carried by the wind, a sound that others might have missed, but not him. He tilted his head, listening closer, his brow furrowing as he heard it again. It was a weak cry, almost swallowed by the night. His heart quickened. He knew this was not the voice of an animal, or the rustle of the wind. It was a voice fragile, trembling, and full of pain. Without wasting time, the human followed the sound, his steps careful, his eyes scanning the shadows. He passed the empty streets, the closed doors, and reached the corner where the sound was strongest. There he saw the stepmother, standing with her hands covered in dirt, her eyes darting nervously as if she feared someone would see her. When she noticed him, her face stiffened, but before she could speak, he already knew something was wrong. The human's instinct screamed at him. He stepped closer, his gaze sharp, his hand brushing the ground where the dirt was fresh. The woman tried to block him, saying it was nothing, just trash she had buried, but he ignored her, his fingers digging through the loose soil. And then he felt it, something small, trembling, struggling weakly beneath the surface. His breath caught. His hands moved faster, pulling away handfuls of dirt, and soon a pale hand broke through, shaking with the last strength of a dying child. His heart sank. He dug harder, ignoring the stepmother's protests, until finally he uncovered the little alien girl's face, her silver eyes blinking against the sudden air, her lips parting as she gasped for breath. The girl coughed, dirt spilling from her mouth, tears running down her cheeks. She clung to his sleeve with desperate fingers, as if afraid he might vanish too. The human looked down at her, his chest heavy with anger and sorrow. He could not understand how anyone could do this to a child. The stepmother's face paled. She stammered, saying it was an accident, that the girl had fallen, but the child shook her head weakly, her voice a whisper. She said the truth. She said her stepmother wanted her gone, wanted her to disappear under the ground. Forever. The human's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with quiet rage. He pulled the girl gently into his arms, brushing the dirt from her hair, holding her close so she could feel warmth again. She buried her face against his chest, her body trembling but alive. Alive because someone had listened. The night seemed to pause, the wind slowing, as if the world itself was watching this moment. A small voice rescued from the silence, a life pulled back from the edge, and one human standing against the cruelty that others ignored. And yet this was only the beginning. The stepmother's eyes narrowed. her lips curling into a bitter smile. She knew she had been caught, but she was not done. Not yet. And the human holding the girl was about to step into a storm far darker than he expected. The human's heart was still racing. The little alien girl clung to him, as if letting go would mean death, her silver eyes wide with fear. Her voice shaking every time she tried to speak. The stepmother stood nearby, her hands clenched. Her face twisting with false concern, she tried to act innocent. But the dirt under her nails told the truth. The human looked at her once, his eyes sharp, then turned his attention back to the child. He brushed the dirt from her face, his touch gentle. The girl gasped for air, her chest rising and falling quickly. She tried to form words, but only broken whispers came out. He leaned closer. Catching the faint sound of her plea, she begged him not to leave her, not to give her back. His grip tightened around her small frame. He whispered that she was safe now, but in his heart he knew it was not true. Safety was still far away, and danger stood right in front of him in the shape of the stepmother, the woman's. Voice broke the moment. She demanded he put the girl down. She said the child was hers to deal with, that outsiders had no right to interfere. Words were filled with venom hidden behind a fake smile. But the human's face did not soften. His silence was louder than any answer. He stood, holding the girl carefully, his eyes scanning the ground, and something caught his attention. A small charm half buried in the dirt. It was broken, scratched. But he could see it was once a necklace, the kind given to children by their real parents. The girl's trembling hand reached for it, her fingers closing around the charm, her tears flowing as if the memory of love returned to her. For the first time in years, the human understood at once. This child had belonged to someone who had cared for her, but now she was trapped with someone who wanted her gone. The stepmother noticed his discovery, and her mask slipped. Anger flashed across her eyes. She hissed that the girl was cursed, that she brought misfortune, and that the village wanted her gone. But the human saw the truth. The curse was not in the child, it was in the cruelty of the woman standing before him. The girl tried to speak again. Her words shaky, she whispered that she had been buried before, hidden away when no one was looking. She whispered that the others always turned away, pretending not to see. And her voice cracked as she said she thought this time she would never rise again. The human's chest tightened. He held her closer, promising in his heart that no such fate would touch her while he lived. The stepmother grew impatient. Her voice rising, she shouted for him to hand the child over.
House.
Her lies becoming bolder, she accused the girl of being unnatural, of attracting bad luck to their home, of causing sickness and ruin. But the human had traveled far across many worlds, and he had seen enough to know when truth was twisted by fear and hate. He stepped back, eyes never leaving the stepmother's face. He could feel her hatred pressing against him like a shadow. Yet he did not waver. The little girl's trembling eased slightly. Sensing the strength in his silence, she clung to him tighter, her head resting against his chest, the sound of his heartbeat calming the storm inside. The villagers began to appear, doors creaking open, faces peering from behind walls, whispers spreading as they saw the scene. Some looked away quickly, not wanting to get involved. Others stayed, watching with guilty eyes. The human could feel their stares, their fear, their indifference, but he did not care. His focus remained on the girl and the stepmother who still demanded control. One old villager finally spoke, his voice low. He said the girl's father had died long ago, and her mother too, and since then she had lived under her stepmother's roof. Suffering in silence, no one had stepped forward to protect her. For fear of the woman's wrath, and because they believed the rumors of curses she spread, the human's jaw tightened. The truth stung, not because it was new, but because it was familiar. He had seen this story before in many places. Cruelty. Hiding behind excuses, the stepmother tried to silence the old man. But the human had already heard enough. He raised his voice, calm but firm, declaring that this child did not belong in the dirt. She belonged among the living. His words carried weight, cutting through the silence of the night. And for the first time, the villagers looked at him with something more than fear. They looked at him with doubt about the woman they had always obeyed. The stepmother's rage boiled over. She spat curses at him, swearing that if he took the girl, he would regret it. Her threats hung in the air, but the human did not flinch. He adjusted his grip on the child, turning his back on the woman, and began to walk away, each step heavy with defiance. Each step a promise that he would not abandon her. The little alien girl lifted her head slightly. Her voice weak, but clear enough to be heard, she whispered, "Thank you." Her words trembling yet filled with something new, something she had not felt in years. Hope. The human's eyes softened for a moment. But he knew the battle was not over. Behind him, the stepmother's eyes glowed with fury, her plans broken but not destroyed. She would come for them again, and when she did, she would not come alone. For now, though, the night belonged to the human and the child, and the fragile sound of her breathing was proof that life, even buried under lies and dirt, could still be found, if only someone dared to listen. The night air was sharp, filled with tension that seemed to press against every wall of the village. The human held the little alien girl close, her fragile body shaking in his arms, her breaths uneven, her small hands clutching his shirt as if he were her last chance to survive. He looked at her pale face, streaked with dirt and tears, and his heart tightened. He knew she was still in danger. And he knew he could not walk away. The stepmother stood only a few steps away, her voice rising like a storm. She shouted that the girl belonged to her, that no outsider had the right to interfere. Her words were filled with venom, her eyes burning with a hatred so deep it seemed to poison the very air. But the human did not answer her. His silence was stronger than any argument. His eyes spoke, louder, eyes that said clearly, "This child is not yours to harm anymore." The little girl whispered again, her voice broken but clear enough for him to hear. She begged him not to give her back. She begged him not to let go. The words pierced him like a blade. He remembered all the journeys he had taken across strange worlds, the many lives he had seen crushed by cruelty, and in this moment he knew he would not add her name to that list. The stepmother lunged forward, trying to grab the girl from his arms, but the human stepped back quickly. Shielding her with his body, he pushed her hand away with a force that surprised her. His voice finally cutting through the night, firm and steady, he told her to stop. His words were not shouted, but they carried the weight of unshakable resolve. A weight that made even the villagers watching from the shadows draw back. The girl buried her face against his chest, tears wetting his shirt, her weak voice whispering that she thought no one would ever come for her, that she thought her life would end under the dirt. His jaw tightened as he heard her words, his anger building not only at the stepmother, but at the entire village that had turned their faces away. While this child suffered, he lowered his head, whispering softly to the girl, telling her she was safe now, telling her he would not let anyone bury her again. Her small fingers gripped tighter as if she was holding on to life itself through him, her body still trembling, but her breathing slowly calming under his steady voice. The stepmother's rage only grew. Her screams echoed through the village. She accused him of stealing her property, of breaking their laws, of bringing ruin upon them, but the villagers who gathered were silent. None dared to step forward.
Their guilt.
Heavy in their eyes, some even lowered their heads in shame. But none moved to help him either. Fear chained them still. The human knew standing here would solve nothing. He needed to take the girl away, away from the eyes that judged her and the hands that tried to bury her. His arms shifted, holding her tighter, and he began to walk, his boots crunching against the dirt, each step defying the stepmother's shouts, each step carrying the girl further from the ground that almost claimed her. The stepmother followed, her voice sharp as knives. She warned him that he would regret this, that the girl was cursed, that misfortune would follow him if he kept her. Her threats cut through the night, but he did not stop. His only answer was the way he held the girl closer, his stride stronger, his eyes fixed ahead. The girl lifted her head slightly, her silver eyes glimmering under the dim light. She looked at him as if seeing something she had never seen before, someone who chose her life over his own safety. Her lips trembled. She whispered, "Thank you," her voice so small, yet carrying more weight than all the stepmother's curses. The human gave her a faint nod, his expression softening for just a moment before hardening. Again with determination, the path out of the village was long and dark. But he did not falter. Behind him, the stepmother's furious voice faded, yet he knew she would not give up. Her eyes had promised vengeance, and he could almost feel it chasing him through the night. But for now, the girl was breathing. She was alive. That was enough to keep him moving. They reached the edge of the settlement. The fields stretching wide under the night sky. The human finally slowed, setting the girl gently on her feet. She swayed, too weak to stand on her own, so he crouched beside her, his hand steadying her shoulders. He asked if she could walk. She shook her head, her eyes filled with exhaustion. So he lifted her again without hesitation, his strength carrying her as if she weighed nothing in that quiet moment. Away from the noise of the village, the girl began to speak more clearly. Her words halting but true, she told him about the endless days of hunger, the punishments, the cold nights spent alone, and the countless times she wished anyone would. Listen, her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. And he listened to every word, each one carving deeper into his heart. The human said nothing at first. He simply carried her. But inside, his decision was already made. He would not abandon her. He would not let her stepmother's hands touch her again. The road ahead might be dangerous, but his path was set. This child was his responsibility. Now the night stretched on, the stars slowly breaking through the clouds above. The little alien girl rested her head on his shoulder, her body finally giving in to sleep, her small breaths warm against his neck. And for the first time in her life, she dreamed not of dirt and darkness, but of a future where someone had chosen her, a future where she was no longer alone behind them. The village sank into uneasy silence, but far in the shadows, the stepmother's eyes burned like coals, her hatred alive, her plans far from finished. She would not let this go, and the human knew it, but he was ready. He had rescued her once, and he would do it again, as many times as it took. The night was quiet, yet danger still lingered. The human carried the little alien girl away from the village, her soft breathing steady against his chest. She was weak, but alive, and every step he took felt like a victory against the cruelty that had almost buried her. But even as he walked further, he knew one thing for certain: the stepmother's hatred had not ended. It had only begun back in the village. The stepmother stood trembling, her nails digging into her palms, her lips pulled back in a bitter snarl. She could still hear the villagers whispering, some pitying the child, others questioning her cruelty. Their eyes had not followed her commands. Their silence no longer felt like obedience. And that burned her deeper than anything. She screamed at them, ordering them to forget what they saw, swearing the girl was cursed, swearing the human had stolen trouble into their lives. But the people only lowered their eyes. None dared to speak. Yet none offered their loyalty. Either she stormed back into her house, her steps loud against the wooden floor, smashing a jug against the wall in her rage. She could not believe it. She had worked so carefully to get rid of the girl, to bury her under dirt, to erase her without a trace, and yet some wandering human had ruined everything. Her hands shook, her heart pounded, and her mind began to twist with plans for revenge, farther down the path. The human stopped beneath an old tree, the wind brushing its leaves softly. He set the girl down carefully, letting her rest against the trunk. She looked up at him, her silver eyes tired but full of trust. She whispered a question, asking if he would leave her once the stepmother came. His head shook firmly, his voice steady as he told her no, he would never leave her. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, a fragile spark of hope warming her for the first time in years. But hope was a fragile shield, and even as she rested, the stepmother was already gathering her fury, her shadow stretching across the village as she knocked on door after door, calling for those still afraid of her, reminding them of the curses she had spread for years. Her tongue dripping with poison, she told them that the human was a danger, that he would bring ruin, that the girl carried death in her blood. Some turned away, but a few still trembled at her words. And those few she gathered like weapons in her hands. She returned to the dirt where the girl had been buried, her eyes glaring at the footprints. Leading away, she knelt down, pressing her palm to the ground as if swearing an oath, her teeth clenched. she vowed to drag the child back. No matter who stood in her way, her voice low and sharp as she promised that the human would pay for humiliating her. Meanwhile, the human listened to the night carefully, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. His instincts sharpened from years of wandering dangerous places. He knew she would not stop. He knew she was gathering strength. He looked down at the girl, sleeping weakly at the base of the tree, her small hand still clutching the broken charm from her real parents. And he felt his anger rise again, not at her weakness, but at the cruelty that had forced her to be strong alone for so long. The girl stirred in her sleep, whispering faint words, dreaming of darkness. Her body shivered, as if the dirt was still pressing against her chest. He laid his cloak over her, crouching beside her, whispering softly that she was safe now. His voice calm like a shield, and slowly her breathing steadied again in the distance. The stepmother's rage grew hotter. She gathered those too fearful to resist her. She lit a torch, her eyes glowing in the firelight, her voice cutting through the night as she promised to tear the girl from the human's arms. Her words filled with venom. She claimed the child was hers, that no one would steal what belonged to her. But deep inside, it was not possession that drove her. It was jealousy, a hatred for the light in the girl's eyes, hatred for the love she had once known. Love the stepmother herself could never feel. The villagers watched from their doors as she marched with her small group, their faces pale, some filled with shame, some with fear, none brave enough to stop her. The night felt heavy, as if the ground itself carried her fury forward under the tree. The human sensed movement. He stood, his hand tightening around the strap of his bag. His eyes narrowing, he could feel the storm drawing closer. The girl stirred again, sensing the danger in the air. Her eyes opening slowly, she whispered his name, though she barely knew it, and asked if the stepmother was coming. He crouched down, meeting her gaze, and answered yes, but his voice did not shake. He told her she would not touch her again. Her small hand reached for his, her grip weak but determined. She whispered that she believed him, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel alone in her fear. The stepmother's torchlight flickered through the trees, her voice carrying as she shouted for him to give the girl back. Her threats, slicing through the dark, promising curses, pain, and ruin if he resisted. But the human stood tall, the girl behind him, his shadow covering her small frame. His eyes unblinking as the firelight drew closer. The night was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of approaching rage, the crackle of fire, the hiss of threats, and the quiet, steady heartbeat of a child who had finally found someone who refused to leave her. The confrontation had not yet begun, but the line was already drawn, the stepmother with her fury, and the human with his unshakable promise. The next moment would decide more than just one child's fate. It would decide if cruelty could still bury innocence, or if one act of defiance could break the chains of silence once and for all. The torchlight drew closer, shadows dancing like predators between the trees. The stepmother's voice carried through the night, sharp and poisonous. She shouted the girl's name, swearing she belonged to her, swearing the human would suffer for taking what was hers. The girl pressed herself against the human's back, her small fingers gripping his cloak, her body trembling as if the ground itself was shaking beneath her feet. The human stood tall, his eyes fixed on the flickering light, his mind calm, though his heart beat fast. He had faced danger before, but this was different. This was not a battle for coin or pride. This was a fight for a child's life, a child who had already been buried once and had almost vanished under the silence of others. He turned slightly, kneeling to meet her eyes, her silver gaze wide with fear. He whispered that she must stay close, that no matter what happened, she must not let go of him. She nodded weakly, her hand tightening around his. The stepmother stepped into view, her face twisted with fury, the firelight making her eyes glow like embers. Behind her were a handful of villagers she had convinced with fear, their torches held high, though their expressions showed doubt. They were not brave, only afraid, and fear made them follow her command. She pointed at the human, her voice rising as she ordered them to take the girl back for a moment. The villagers hesitated, the weight of the human stare pressing on them. He did not shout, he did not move, but his presence was like stone, unyielding, unshakable. The girl peeked from behind him. Her eyes meeting the frightened faces, she saw in them the same silence that had allowed her suffering. And she buried her face again. Unable to bear it, the stepmother snarled. Pushing one of the men forward, he stumbled, then stopped. Unwilling to cross the human's path, anger burned hotter in her. She realized fear of him was greater than fear of her curses. She spat at the ground, swearing she would not stop, swearing she would hunt them until the child was hers again. Her threats hung heavy in the air, but the human did not wait to hear more with steady steps. He lifted the girl into his arms and turned away, his boots striking the ground with purpose each step, carrying them further into the forest. The stepmother screamed, ordering her followers to chase. But their feet were heavy, their hearts uncertain, and though they followed, their steps were clumsy. Lacking the fire she demanded, the forest swallowed them quickly, tall trees standing like silent guardians. The wind carrying the smell of damp earth, the human moved swiftly. His strength, carrying the girl as if she were weightless, she clung to him, her eyes darting at the shadows. Every crack of a branch making her flinch. He whispered softly to calm her, promising she was safe with him, though he knew danger was still near behind them. The glow of torches flickered, stepmother's voice echoing through the trees, a mixture of rage and desperation, her words dripping curses, her cries piercing the night. Yet no matter how loud she was, the human did not stop. His focus was fixed on escape, on keeping the girl out of her reach. The girl's voice trembled as she spoke, asking where they were going, asking if the stepmother would find them. He looked down at her, his expression firm but gentle. He told her they would go where the stepmother's voice could not reach, where she could no longer bury her in lies or dirt. The girl's eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of something unfamiliar. Trust chase stretched on. The stepmother's group stumbling through the forest, their torches dimming, their voices growing distant. The human moved like water flowing between trees, his steps careful yet quick. The girl's head rested against his shoulder, her body exhausted, but her heart beating with new strength as she felt the steady rhythm of his stride. Finally, they reached a clearing where the moon broke through the clouds, bathing the grass in silver light. The human stopped, setting the girl gently on her feet. She swayed, weak and tired, but he steadied her, his hands strong at her shoulders. She looked up at him, her lips trembling as she asked if he would truly keep her safe. He knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes, and swore that he would, no matter what came in the distance. The stepmother's voice still echoed, but fainter now, her fury chasing them but unable to close the distance. She screamed into the night, her threats wild, her curses sharp. Yet every word sounded weaker against the silence of the forest and the promise that had just been made between the human and the girl. The girl clutched her broken charm, pressing it against her chest, her tears falling silently. But this time, they were not only from fear, they were from the warmth of being chosen, of being saved. She whispered softly that no one had ever done this for her. No one had ever stood against her stepmother. The human placed a hand over hers, steady and sure, telling her that she was no burden, that her life mattered. The night stretched on, the two of them hidden in the silver glow of the clearing, the stepmother's rage still burning somewhere in the darkness. But unable to touch them now, the girl leaned against him, her small body finally relaxing, her breath slowing as sleep pulled her eyes closed. He lifted her again, carrying her gently, and as he looked into the forest ahead, he knew the escape was only the first step. The real fight had yet to come still. For this moment, he allowed himself a breath of relief, because the little alien girl was alive in his arms, no longer buried under dirt, no longer silenced by cruelty, but carried forward by the strength of someone who refused to let her go. The forest grew darker as the night deepened. The human carried the little alien girl through twisting paths, his eyes sharp for danger, his arms steady, though his body ached. The girl's small head rested on his shoulder, her silver eyes half closed, her breathing soft. She was safe for now, yet her body trembled even in sleep, as if the memory of dirt pressing down on her chest still haunted her at last. The The human reached a small cabin hidden among the trees. It was old, its walls worn by years of rain and wind, but it was strong enough to keep them safe for the night. He pushed the wooden door open with his shoulder. Stepping inside, the air smelled of ash and pine. The silence thick but comforting. He laid the girl gently on a rough bed covered with blankets, her small frame sinking into the warmth, for the first time in days. She was not lying on cold ground, but on something soft and safe. The girl stirred, her eyes opening slowly, confusion flickering in them as she looked around. Her lips parted as she whispered a question, asking where they were. The human crouched beside her. His voice calm, he told her this was his shelter, a place he used when traveling, a place where no one could find them easily. Her hand clutched the blanket as if afraid it would vanish, her eyes filling with tears. She whispered that it felt like a dream. The human lit a small fire in the hearth, the glow filling the cabin with gentle warmth. The girl stretched her small hands toward it, her pale skin glowing softly in the light. She sat quietly, watching the flames, her face thoughtful, as if she was trying to understand what safety felt like, after years of knowing only fear. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice fragile but clear. She told him pieces of her story. How her real mother had given her the charm she still held, how her father had once promised to protect her, but sickness took them both, leaving her in the hands of the woman who called herself Stepmother. Her words faltered as she described the punishments, the hunger, the cold nights where she thought no one would ever care if she vanished. Her shoulders shook as she spoke, yet she forced the words out, as if needing someone to finally hear them. The human listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his heart heavy. He had traveled through many lands, seen many cruelties, but hearing it from the lips of a child cut deeper than any wound. When she finished, he placed a hand on her shoulder. His voice low but steady, he told her she was not cursed, she was not a burden. She was a child who deserved to live, to eat, to be warm, and no one had the right to take that from her. Her tears flowed freely. But this time they were not only tears of pain, they were tears of love. Release. He gave her food from his pack, simple bread and dried fruit. She ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might be taken from her. When she finished, she leaned against him, her small body finally relaxing, her eyes heavy, her breathing softer. For the first time, she felt safe enough to close her eyes without fear of waking under dirt again. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying whispers of the stepmother's rage. The human knew she would not stop. She would follow, her hatred too strong to let go. But within these walls, for one night at least, the girl was beyond her reach. He stood watch by the window, his hand resting near his pack, his eyes scanning the shadows, every sound making his muscles tense. He could not afford to rest yet. The girl dreamed restlessly, her lips moving as she whispered words in her sleep. She cried out once, her hands clutching at the blanket. The human moved to her side quickly, placing his hand on hers. His voice calm as he told her she was safe. Her body eased at the sound. Her breath slowing again, he stayed there, watching over her until she drifted deeper into Restor's past, the fire burning low, the night dragging on. The human's mind remained sharp. He thought of the stepmother's fury, of the villagers who had turned their backs, of the fragile child who had survived only because he had stopped and listened. He knew this was more than rescue. This was a battle between cruelty and compassion, a battle he had stepped into without hesitation, and one he would not abandon. Near dawn, the girl awoke, the pale light of morning spilling through the cracks of the cabin. She looked at him with tired eyes but a faint smile, her voice small as she whispered that she was still alive. He nodded, his expression firm, telling her that she would remain alive, that no one would bury her again while he was with her. Smile widened slightly. Fragile, yet filled with new strength, the sound of footsteps cracked the morning calm. Faint but real, the human stiffened. Moving to the door, the girl clutched the blanket, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered her stepmother's name, and he knew she was right. The shadow of danger had not vanished. It had only followed them into the dawn. The human turned back, Meeting the girl's gaze, his voice calm, though his body was ready for battle, he told her to stay hidden, to stay quiet, and to trust him. She nodded, her hands gripping the broken charm tightly. As if drawing courage from the memory of love and the promise of protection, the sun rose slowly, its light falling over the cabin. But with it came the sound of angry voices. The stepmother had returned, her rage louder than the morning birds. And the human knew the time for hiding was over. The shelter had given them rest, but it could not hold back the storm forever. The morning light spilled across the trees, but instead of peace, carried the sound of footsteps and voices. The stepmother had returned, her fury louder than the birds. She had gathered a small group again, their torches no longer needed. In daylight, but their fear and hesitation still chained them to her commands. The human stood at the door of the cabin, his body tense, his eyes sharp, ready for what was coming inside. The little alien girl sat on the bed, clutching the broken charm against her chest, her silver eyes wide, her lips whispering prayers that he would not leave her. She could hear the stepmother's voice outside, calling her name, dripping with venom. Promising pain if she did not come back, the child pressed herself deeper into the blanket, every muscle in her body shaking. But she remembered his words from the night before. He had promised she would never be buried again. She chose to believe. The human stepped out into the morning air, his shadow long across the ground. The stepmother froze for a moment when she saw him, her eyes blazing, her voice rising in fury as she demanded the child back. She shouted that the girl was hers, that she had the right to do with her as she pleased. But the human's voice cut through her lies, calm and steady. He said clearly that the girl no longer belonged to her cruelty. She belonged to life, to freedom, to herself. The stepmother's face twisted. She ordered the men with her to seize him, but they hesitated, their eyes shifting nervously. The human's presence was like stone, unshakable, unmovable. One of the men dropped his gaze. Another stepped back, unwilling to face the storm in the human's eyes. The stepmother screamed at them, her control slipping as fear weakened their loyalty. She stepped forward herself, her nails sharp, her voice shrill. She spat curses at him, swearing he would regret defying her, swearing misfortune would follow him forever if he kept the child. But the human did not move. He stood tall, his voice steady as he told her that threats meant nothing, that cruelty had ruled long enough, and that today it would end. The girl peeked from the door, her small hands gripping the frame, her eyes wide as she watched. She had never seen anyone stand against her stepmother before, never seen anyone speak without fear. Her heart pounded. And for the first time she felt the spark of courage in her own chest. The stepmother lunged, her hands reaching like claws, but the human caught her wrist in midair, his grip firm, his voice low as he told her to stop. Her eyes widened, rage and shock mixing. She tried to pull back, but his strength was greater. He pushed her hand away, his stance unshaken. She stumbled, fury blazing as she screamed at the villagers who had followed, but none stepped forward. Their silence was different now. It was not obedience. It was shame. The girl's voice broke the air. Small yet strong, she called out from the doorway. Telling everyone the truth, she shouted that her stepmother had buried her, that she had tried to silence her forever. Her words cracked but carried across the clearing, her small body trembling, but her eyes fierce with the courage she had borrowed. From the human, the villagers lowered their heads, so unable to deny what they had allowed to happen. The stepmother spun, her face pale for the first time, her lies shattered. She shrieked at the girl to be silent. But the human stepped between them, his voice like iron. He said the child had spoken, and he would not let her words be buried. The girl's hand clutched the charm tighter, her tears falling, but this time they were tears of defiance, not weakness. Stepmother screamed, one last threat, her voice breaking with desperation. She swore the girl would never escape her, but the villagers did not move. They no longer believed, and the human stood tall, his shadow covering the child, his words final as he told her that she had already lost. Because the girl was alive, and no amount of hate could change, that her face twisted into a mask of rage. In defeat, she turned and stormed back into the forest, her followers scattering, some throwing down their torches, some walking away in silence. Her voice echoed faintly, promising vengeance. But it carried no strength anymore. It was only the cry of a woman who had lost control. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the sound of the child's breathing. She stepped out slowly, her silver eyes fixed on the human, her lips trembling as she whispered if it was over. He knelt before her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, his voice steady as he told her yes, for now it was over. She was safe. She was free. Her small body shook as she fell into his arms, hugging him tightly, whispering that no one had ever stood for her before, whispering that she thought she would always be alone. His hand rested on her back, his eyes closing for a moment, his heart heavy with all she had endured, but lightened by the promise of what lay ahead. He whispered back that she would never be alone again. The villagers remained silent, none daring to speak, but their faces carried the weight of guilt. The human did not look at them. His focus was only on the child in his arms, the girl who had been buried under dirt and cruelty, and who now breathed free air, carried not by luck, but by the choice of one human who had listened when no one else did. The sun rose higher, the shadows fading. The little alien girl lifted her head, her silver eyes shining in the light. She whispered thank you, her voice soft but full of truth. The human smiled faintly, his voice low as he told her she owed him nothing, that all he had done was what anyone should do, yet inside he knew it was more. It was a bond now sealed between them. Together, they walked from the cabin, the girl's small hand in his, the world ahead uncertain, but no longer dark. The stepmother's rage might rise again, danger might return, but for now, the girl was free, alive, and no longer silenced, her voice carried by the strength of one who refused to let her be forgotten.